we're going to have now a presentation from two colleagues again, this time from the University of Antwerp. And you may have heard of the Open Expertise Center for Accessible Media and Culture of the University of Antwerp and the wonderful thing they do there. But if you haven't, or if you're a fan and want to hear more, then you are in the right place, because Sabien and Nina will showcase 3 of their participatory projects featuring integrated audio description for a dance performance, development of a multisensorial guide for a selection of artworks, and a handheld device supporting pre-recorded audio description, sign language, and subtitling for deaf and hard of hearing for theater visitor project. So quite a few things to pack in your presentation. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And I made you co-host as well, so you can share your screens or any materials. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Alina. Can you hear me? Is the sound working? Yes. Okay, then I will just share my screen. So there you go. I hope it's coming. Yes, is that okay?
Perfectly.
Okay, great. So hello everyone. We're talking from Antwerp, and we means Nina Reviers and I. My name is Sabien Hanoulle. I'm a white female with more gray than brown hair and glasses. I'm a teacher in Italian translation, also subtitling, Dutch writing, and translation science. But today I'm here with my other hat as a coordinator of the Expertise Center for Accessible Media and Culture, Open, where I'm closely involved in all the activities, and I'll tell you more in a second, but I'll first let Nina present herself.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I am Nina Reviers. I am a white, able-bodied 30-something woman from Flanders, Belgium, so Dutch-speaking. I am an assistant professor in media accessibility and audio translation in Antwerp, manager of the Open Expertise Center, and also a parent of young children, so one of those people trying to juggle work-life balance. I think that sums it up. Back to you, Sabine.
Thank you. So, Open. The Expertise Center was founded in 2018 by Aline Remaal, whom you probably all know. And the aim is to raise visibility of accessibility in all its facets. It has 3 pillars: research, consultancy for companies and culture houses, and activities like workshops and conferences for language professionals. We also try to build a network between all the stakeholders in this area. And in our program in the university, we offer several courses concerning accessibility, like in the audiovisual communication in bachelor's, and then audiovisual translation studies in bachelor and master's. There's also subtitling courses in a master's program and a media accessibility course in the master's program as well. The projects we present today have been developed under the umbrella of Open. To start, I prepared to give you some very little theoretical background. I'm afraid it all has been said already, because Emilia and Francesca just mentioned how important cooperation is, but bear with me, I prepared it, so I will tell you what I prepared, and then we just go on with the projects themselves. Well, to start with, in the special issue of the Journal of Audiovisual Translation in November 2022, Carol and Ramal state that the most recent developments in AVT and media accessibility research have confirmed that collaboration, partnership, and mutual understanding would be the key to success for traditional and new players. So indeed, as Pablo Romero Fresco said, users have always been involved in media accessibility, but their level of agency differed. And Pablo said that traditional media accessibility promotes a paternalistic and self-serving approach that perpetuates the agency of the able and the passive role of the disabled. In addition, their disability is seen as a problem to overcome. While in critical disability studies is emphasized the value disability can bring. So there is a call for to give users more agency. Georgina Kleege, a blind writer, professor, and researcher, has formulated it as follows. True access needs to be understood as something more than one-sided act of generosity or charity. The presence of those formerly excluded people must be understood to invite the wholesale scrutiny of what the culture takes for granted about itself. The hope is that blind people can bring a perspective that has not been articulated before. In other words, including different abled perspective can be enriching for everyone and beyond taking barriers away. Seen from the universal design perspective, the traditional approach led to what Louise Fryer describes as traditional media accessibility reiterates an approach where access is seen to concern exclusively groups of people with a perceived impairment. So this said, now to the projects. How do we try to make all these nice words reality? Today we will present 3 of our projects. The theater tablet project, which is about theater plays. A Touch of Museum to Scale is about a museum we have on the campus of Antwerp, on the campus of Antwerp, and then a dance project called Isomo. There are 3 collaborative projects with various stakeholders from the start, including participation of expert users, so researchers, performers, artists, practitioners, and users all together. The projects are presented in a chronological way on level of collaboration, which is also because the awareness has risen with the time. And after each project, we will leave some time for questions. So now, to start with the theater, it was in 2019 that we got in touch with the NT Ghent Theater to see if we could test at first their theater tablet. The tablet is a tablet that users take on their lap, or it is put just in front, on the seat, just in front of them. And on that tablet, they can choose which kind of accessibility service they need. Is it audio description, subtitling for the deaf or the hard of hearing, or sign language, and And they come a little bit earlier to the theater. People help them to install what they need, and then they can watch the play. This project started in very close collaboration with the theater himself, with Pantea, the company in accessibility solutions and for performing arts, and also a software developer, and then us in the University of Antwerp. I must say that this first project is mainly about universal design and less about collaboration, because it was a longer time ago. And the only form of collaboration here in this project is the deaf sign language interpreter. But I think it is still interesting because we're still working on it, and it is also very interesting in the teaching we have. We had 4 plays in total with the tablet. The second was last year and the year before, Red and from Luc Perceval and Ferox Tempus from Luanda Casella. And then this year we started with the Great Apes of the West Coast of Princess Isatu Hassan Bangura. I will show you a short after movie we made of this project. I hope the sound works. There is audio description on this clip. So let me see if this works for you. You can hear the sound? No? Okay, sorry. Then I probably didn't share the audio. Let me see. Sorry, it worked when we tested. Share audio, share sound.
Serge, a Flemish sign language interpreter, introduces the NT Ghent tablet project.
I was part of the NT Ghent Theatre Tablet project. Thanks to this project, everyone who loves theatre, including people who are deaf or hard of hearing, will be able to enjoy the performances. Thanks to the tablet.
A few spectators are sitting in a dark theatre. They're holding a tablet on their laps and are reading, watching, or listening to additional information.
On March 4th, 2020, NT Ghent presented the unique Theatre Tablet project. The Theatre Tablet provides subtitling, audio description, and Flemish Sign Language interpreting. This is how NT Ghent makes theatre accessible for everyone, including people who are deaf or hard of hearing, blind, or visually impaired.
Okay, this was just a little preview on how it works. The theater play was chosen, I'll just go back for a while before jumping to the results. The theater play was chosen bearing in mind some technical issues with pre-recording accessibility features, because that's what was done. The audio description and subtitling and sign language was pre-recorded for live performances, which is obviously quite a challenge. It was a monologue in Dutch with a short prologue and epilogue in French, and everything was surtitled in English. The audio description, the audio introduction, and the subtitles for the hard of hearing were written by students under our supervision. And the students also organized a survey and analyzed the final quality. The first result that came up was that there is still some room for improvement for synchronization, and this is obviously the most difficult aspect, because the audio description was sometimes too much behind because of shorter silences, or the actress spoke quicker, or the action was not performed. So of course, this is what live performances are about. We also realized that the translation process is different because of the technology. You have to avoid anticipation and interpretation, which is sometimes needed for good audio description. It must be thought of very well in order to avoid to tell things that are not there. Of course, this is also always an issue with subtitling or audiovisual translation, but even more in this case of pre-recording for a live performance. So it is important to write the audio description with based upon the most recent version of the play, because well, to avoid overlap with live dialogue, the audio description must be a little shorter than traditional audio description, and there is no room for improvisation. It is very important that there is a close collaboration with the theater, and the most recent version of the performance is often just some days or just 1 week before the the premiere. So it must go quite quickly, and there is quite a flexibility needed from the audio describer, from the theater, to get in touch and to communicate well. It is also labor intensive because of that very short timing. And as overall, we must say that the survey revealed that the user experience survey revealed that the users were in general quite happy that there are experiments being done, even though there are still some technical issues. But they were very happy that this tablet makes it possible to go to any performance and not the only performance with live AD. They can just choose. They book the tablet before and they can go with their friends, with anybody on the same moment in the evening or in the afternoon. It's a lot more flexible for them. It gives them more autonomy. Then we had the second and third performance of last year and the year before. There were multilingual performances with Dutch subtitles and audio description. Those were made by professionals. And Nina and I just gave feedback to the theater about the subtitles and about the audio description. We also organized a workshop with the theater assistants, just to give some tips to make the subtitles and the audio description even better. And then there was the fourth performance, which is going on now, The Great Apes of the West Coast. It's an English monologue with interlingual Dutch subtitles. And the focus in this project is on the SDH. A student is developing a strategy to adapt it to the tablet and the performance. And the research question is how we can use the interlingual Dutch subtitles on scene and add only the speakers and the sound identification on the tablet. Is it better to do it that way? So bearing in mind that the tablet is close to the eyes and the subtitles on scene are further away. So spectators using the tablet look to the close by to the tablet and then further away to the theater. So they have to make a movement with the eyes or with the head, which is not always very comfortable. So we want to investigate what is the best way to provide the subtitles in this setting. In general, it is good to investigate these innovative solutions and to have theater experience more user-friendly. But we have to bear in mind that the technique is still developing and that the close collaboration with the theater is really a must. Maybe it's not adapted for any performances with who are quite complicated with in its setting or visually very complicated or with just very little silences might be hard to pre-record. Now, the teaching, how did we integrate the theater tabling in the teaching? We had the research, the master thesis, which is on the research level about audio description, audio introduction, and SDH. The project also helps the students to motivate, to think about innovative workflows. Sorry, there is a typo, I see. And it's also interesting for them to get in touch with expert users because most of the students just don't have any contact with them, and they're always very happy to work on those real projects, to go to the theater with us and talk about it afterwards. So our experience is that they work really hard on this project and they really remember it. So if you want, I can leave a short while for questions about this project. Otherwise, we just go on with the next one. I see a hand is raised.
There is actually
Angela?
a hand, yeah.
Of
Yes.
course. Who else?
Thank you.
You're
Go ahead.
welcome. I'm sorry, I'm very active in the Q&A. I was wondering if you had any, maybe you said it and I missed it, if you had any feedback from the users about the theater tablet, because I'm sure there are pros and cons in the sense that, of course, they can enjoy the performance whenever they want and they have the accessibility provision they need. However, I wonder if the creative aspect or the immersion aspect is the same, if you had any feedback on that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I didn't mention it in detail. For this particular play, one user said the first play, Compassi, one user said, well, actually the audio description was not a very big added value because I could understand the play even without the tablets. Okay. And others said it was good, but on another project for Ferox Tempus, I think the user was happy with the AD and with the tablets. But another performance where Nina and I went to for Ferox Tempus another day, there were quite a lot of technical problems. So we were happy that at that moment there were no users. Otherwise, they would have missed half of the performance. So that technical aspect is still very much there. If the Wi-Fi in the theater is not strong enough, then the subtitles stop or the audio description remains behind. So it's not so easy. It has to be checked well on beforehand. In general, in the survey, most users said I'm really happy that I feel welcome again to the theater, because I have that autonomy. I can go whenever I want. I don't have to change all my plans for that one usually Sunday morning performance with live ID. I think that's the main.
Yeah, I think in terms of the immersive experience, I think some prefer live AD because it's a bit more detailed and synchronous with the performance, but here it's a bit more general AD, for instance. But it offers more autonomy. But one user also commented, or two users specifically, that the sound quality of the pre-recorded AD is much better than with the systems that are usually used in live theaters, and that they very much appreciated that in terms of the immersive. So there's definitely pros and cons to both projects.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions, so I suppose we can continue.
Okay, then Nina, you take over for the museum project.
Yes, I can't manage the slides, so you
I will.
continue. Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so the second project is called The Touch of Museum to Scale. So we move to accessibility of art. And in this project, we developed a prototype of an audio guide for an exhibition, which is called Museum to Scale. It's an exhibition at our university. Our university has quite an art collection. It's an exhibition that used to travel the world, but now has a permanent place on our campus. It is a collection of over 100 miniature museum halls. So on the slide, there is a picture of a wall in which there are about 20 boxes integrated with at the front glass, so that you can actually look into the box. They are about 60 centimeters wide, deep, and high. So, you know, a little wunderkamer where that you can look in, and about 100 Belgian artists have created a miniature museum in these boxes. So it's a representation of art in Belgium from the 1940s to today, a wide collection of paintings, sculptures, installations, video, and so on. So this is quite a unique collection, which was opened in 2018 when we also started our Open Expertise Center. So we went to the Cultural Department and Arts on Campus Council, asking whether they might want to collaborate to make the arts more accessible. We only got very small project funding, so we are developing a prototype for about 5 works. But the idea is also to raise awareness within the university, and hopefully the prototype will serve as a learning experience and best practice example to develop accessibility of arts at our university. So this was a practice-based project, but of course we are researchers, so we did allow ourselves quite some experimenting in this project. And when we started, we didn't have a very concrete plan. We wanted to develop as we go, but we did have a few aims tying in with the things Sabine introduced. So we wanted to involve users with varying abilities in access creation. We wanted to explore universal access services, not focus on a service for specific target group, to try to do things that would work for all audiences. And specifically also see if we can bring accessibility and artistic creation closer together. Traditionally, this audio description or accessibility is made by the translators, separated from the artists, and we wanted to bring these closer together. The project is, or could be called, a collaborative action research project. So over time, we took several consecutive steps in a cyclical way. There is an image on the left of the slide. It's a bit small maybe to read, but it is basically a timeline of the different activities we did. We started with some research, started creating the Dutch audio guide, Then we got our grant, so we had a little money to do a bit more. We did some brainstorming and group discussions with various stakeholders, back to creating, back to testing, brainstorming, and so forth. Like I said, we didn't have a very strict plan when starting out, but kind of developed things as we went along. We wanted to involve people with a lived experience of disability, but actually also invited many perspectives. There were researchers involved, artists with and without disability, translators, describers, users with and without disabilities, art experts, but also the cultural department. So we tried to invite many perspectives to reflect the inclusive approach that we aimed for. Yes, so the result, we're still working on this project. It is almost finished. But the result is a multisensory prototype. That's what we're calling it on the slide. There is quite a colorful image illustrating the different services we have developed for the visual senses. There's, of course, the original visual art, but there's also Flemish Sign Language interpretation. There is subtitling in English and Dutch. In the audio guide, also full transcriptions of the texts, of the spoken texts, are available in English and Dutch. For the ears, there is the audio guide in English and Dutch, male and female voices, and there's also soundscapes that have been created for some of the guides. And for the hands, we are also developing objects for tactile exploration. There's lots to be said about how and lessons learned from all these services, but there's three specific examples that I want to develop a little. And the first one is the inclusion of sign language poetry and soundscape. This is a little bit an approach, example of participatory approach, but also relating a bit to the concept of disability gain that Sabien talked about. So we approached Deaf Flanders, an organization that provides sign language translation. They work with deaf sign language interpreters for whom sign language is a mother tongue. And they translated the guide, but we also asked for creative ideas and inputs, and they proposed Hilde Verhelst, who made a sign language poetry performance of one of the artworks. She says herself that it's sort of performance, which can actually not really directly be translated into spoken or written words, because it includes invented gestures, visual vernacular. So it is a poetic artistic interpretation of the artwork. We also, for those who don't use sign language, can't see, have developed a soundscape, so an oral interpretation of the artwork, which was created by Yannick Heer, who is a visually impaired sound artist and sound designer. And at the moment, we also have a non-blind and non-deaf artist who's also making a spoken word poem, so an interpretation from sign language poetry into spoken poetry. But I couldn't add that here because it's not quite finished yet. But Sabien, you can now show the clip. It's not the original audio guide, it's just a small sample snippets that I've put together as an illustration of what it looks like and sounds like.
This audio guide of the work of Arne Kinze starts with a Flemish sign language performance by Hilde Verhelst and is accompanied by a soundscape created by Yannick Heer. Arne Kinze's miniature museum gallery is called There is No Chaos, Only Structure. It features an installation dating from 2011. Geert, is this a typical theme for Arne Kinze?
Yes, it's quite typical of his work. Arne Kinze reshapes material, and he's doing that in this cabinet.
Okay, so just a snippet to give you an idea. In the end, we also heard the audio guide, which is a little bridge to the second example. Because the audio guide follows the principles of what we could call inclusive audio description. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. Yes. So because we wanted to make one audio guide that could be used by everyone, and based on research, for instance, by Hutchinson and Eardley, there are lots of arguments from research that suggest that visual interpretation, visual description is actually very valuable for all audiences. I am paraphrasing the quote that I've put on the slide here. For sighted visitors, it can be stimulating to have these visual descriptions for what can be called guided looking. For everyone, it can sometimes be difficult to know what you see when you look at art. What am I looking at? And particularly, I can see what I see, but what does it mean? And how should I interpret this? Is difficult, and visual interpretation can help audiences to make those connections and understand what they are looking at. So that is also our approach, trying to include these visual interpretations that are for the benefit of who is visually impaired to know what you're looking at, but also to just understand what the artwork is about. This is also an approach that corresponds a lot to the concept of slow art. It is something that I haven't done much research about, but when talking to people, it is a word that pops up regularly. So slow art is the concept of, instead of just going to a museum and having this browsing behavior and briefly looking at the artworks, taking your time to really discover an artwork in depth, sometimes spending an hour discovering an artwork. And this interpretative or inclusive audio description helps with that type of approach to the art experience. There are many strategies for developing such inclusive ADs or guides, some of which we've experimented with in our guide is combining really describing as a narrative, creating a narrative around the artwork that includes visual description, but interweaving it with also background information, that you don't have first the description, then the information, but mixing it into a narrative, including metaphors, comparisons, the supports, particularly visual interpretation, not just knowing how big and what are the colors, what are the shapes, but also associations, being able to make connections with more intangible meanings. Also adding expert voices. As you heard, there was a male voice, which is the president of Art on Campus, an art expert giving his views on the artists and their work, to also add a more subjective and personal approach, which is not just describer-led, but offers an expert voice. These are just three of possible strategies. One of our students did do a questionnaire with non-blind users to see whether this type of audio description, whether they like it. We didn't tell them that it was an inclusive guide. We just said, this is an audio guide, what do you think? And it were quite positive responses, particularly for users who were not very experienced with art. They appreciated mostly this type of guide. And then the final, most complicated example are the what we're calling right now artistic objects for tactile exploration. We need to find a better or catchier phrase. But very early on, we learned that just an audio guide, even with soundscapes, might not be enough, and that particularly for people with a visual impairment, a direct tactile exploration of art is very valuable. So we wanted to add tactile objects, but in light of our aims, we wanted to give them a little artistic dimension, but also in terms of the inclusive approach, we wanted to make tactile objects that add an experience for all audiences, also those who are non-blind. And that was, of course, the difficult question, what is the role of touch in a universal way? So we kind of copied the best practice that in our research we found from the Netherlands, where artists, it were artist students in that case, were asked to create an artwork made for touch, which was an interpretation of an original artwork. So instead of making a replica that shows the size and the shape or the texture of the original artwork, it's more of an artistic interpretation into touch. So we have two artists who are doing that very challenging intersemiotic artistic translation process, or whatever you can call it. One is Sonja Kleege. She is a semi-professional artist, and she's herself visually impaired. Her work is still in progress, so I can't say a lot about it, but she will create these objects as an art lover, as an artist, but also having the lived experience of experiencing art through audiodescription and through touch. And the second artist, which you can is presented here in the pictures on the side, is Nadia Navo. She's actually an artist of the Museum to Scale collection. She has a work of art in a mini museum in the collection. And she was very interested and prepared to make a tactile translation of her own work. Accessibility is not really part of her background, but of course she's the artist, so who has a better insight into the essence of the work of art than the artist herself? So we found that a very interesting angle as well. And on the slide, there's two pictures of her original work and of the tactile object she made. Visually, there's no connection between both. The original work is a collection of white ceramic figures. I think on the pictures, there's about 6 of these figurines. They're very small in size. I think the smallest one is like a small Coca-Cola can, the biggest one like half-a-liter Coca-Cola can. Maybe a weird comparison, but they're not very big. They are white, they're very smooth, they are quite complex, very intricate, a little bit of Baroque style figures. When you look at them at first glance, that's also how Nadia describes her own work. It's not really clear what you're looking at. It's a bit chaotic, but when you take your time to really look closely at the details, you start to find and recognize all sorts of shapes. The one in the left bottom, for instance, when you look closely, it's the bust of a woman. She's wearing a cowboy hat. The figure at the right is quite complex, but if you look closely, you can figure out that there's the shape of Marge Simpson from The Simpsons hidden in there. The one in the back also has the head of Mickey Mouse, and a bigger figurine in the middle has two human shapes, male and female, intertwined in a sensual position, and they have antlers on their heads. So it's chaos at first glance, but then details as you dig deeper. And that is also a little bit what in the tactile object is translated. If you look at the tactile object, unfortunately, in an online context, we can't touch it. But it looks a little bit of a messy heap of all sorts of materials. It's not really clear what it is. There's brown, black, white, and green. There's yellow letters in the background, or something that looks like letters. It's a messy heap. But the idea behind is the same as the visual experience of her artwork, in the sense that when you touch this, you're not really sure what you're touching. There's all sorts of shapes. It's a little messy heap. But when you take your time to really touch the details, you start to recognize shapes and forms. You recognize a wire running through it. You recognize clay that it can still be changed, that is still soft. When you feel on the left and you take your time, you feel that there's a corn hidden somewhere. So it's the same principle, but then in touch. Chaos at first, and then you can start exploring details. And a second idea in the tactile object that came from a brainstorming session also with users is that the tactile object does not really represent the original artwork itself. It doesn't resemble it in any way, not in touch and not visually, but it reflects the creation process that Nadia uses when creating her work. Because the figurines in the original work are wide and smooth, but she creates them using all sorts of materials, debris, and objects that she finds in her house, on the streets, that she collects from her travels. And she puts these together into shapes. And then she, from these shapes made out of all sorts of materials, she makes a mold that she fills with ceramic and then bakes. So the raw materials that you don't see in the end product that she uses are very varied in shape, in texture, in material. And one user said that is very interesting from an inclusive perspective, to give people access to these raw materials and an understanding of the creation process of the artist. Because that gives all users an extra insight into the artist's minds and her work process. But of course, this is a completely different type of tactile object than maybe traditionally in museum accessibility. Like I said, we didn't have any idea what this process might result in. We just wanted to work with users and artists with this idea of artistic interpretation, and this is what came out of it. Of course, we haven't tested this extensively with users. It's just finished, the tactile objects, so we'll have to report later on what users, blind and non-blind, think of this tactile interpretation. Some reflections. Working together with artists and experts by experience really opens doors to new approaches, but I think the previous presenters also said it's approaches that go way beyond translation alone and venture into creation and communication more widely. But I think that is where access is going at the moment. And I think it's very interesting from a research point of view to also think about the role it might have in this slow art experience, because that seems to be a key element in the inclusive approach of designing for all. Obviously, this process has also been very challenging. Particularly what we're struggling with now is a challenge to achieve coherence across all these translations and creations. We have quite an eclectic collection now of sound and poetry and visual performance and then touch objects. So how do we bring this into coherent and an accessible performance that users really know, what do I listen or watch or touch first? We're still figuring that out. But the second thing is also what Louise Breyer once termed as art over access, and other people have also repeated this, that all these artistic creative approaches might be very interesting, but sometimes forget real access needs. Of course, access for the people who need it is the priority, and the artistic dimension cannot take the upper hand. For instance, the objects, the tactile objects might be interesting from an artistic point of view, but is the tactile experience still meeting basic access needs for people with a visual impairment, of course? And I think that's a very fine line and a different balance to find, and a tension that I find very interesting, and that I think deserves also more research in the future. I think there's one more slide. Yes, just how this relates to our teaching. So most research in this project has been done by MA students for their master thesis. I think there were 4 or 5 who did literature reviews, who developed strategies for audio description, did questionnaires. We also use it in our MA classes to get students acquainted with more collaborative workflows. Also from the previous presentation, traditional AD is very describer-led, translators, describers working mostly on their own. But this is very much changing. I think students need to learn early on how to work together in a team with various people on creating accessibility and audio description. And I also use these artworks and the prototype to do inclusive AD writing and creative AD writing exercises with the students, not just writing for people with a visual impairment, but how do you write for all audiences? And if you have more creative license, what might that look like? And I'm always very surprised about the creative competences of our students. They come up with very creative and interesting ideas. There's one example on the slide, but I think I'm already going over time, so I'm just going to leave it for questions if there are any.
I think Angela has one.
Not this time. I was actually clapping.
Oh, okay. I saw a hand. Okay. And Dragos, do you have a question? I know you're clapping. Thank you. Okay, we just move to the third project we want to present. It's this is a very short because it just started. It's about dance, and it's a follow-up project on, it's called Isomo 2, and it follows up on Isomo 1. And Isomo 1 is a dance performance. You see just a photograph of the dance performance here in the slide with on the left the Said Harbi, the blind dancer, and then the girl dancer on the right. The creator is Iris Bush, and the idea of Isomo 2 is to take the audio description from Isomo 1 to create a new performance. So first, the audio description of Isomo 1 had to be written. And to do that, we came together with Joyce Vuilsteke, a visually impaired ex-dancer and a woman who lives here in Ghent and who's very interested in all kinds of art performances. And Nina and I, and we did a kind of brainstorm session in which we also kind of imitated the movements and just to get inspired and to talk with each other about the words to use in this audio description. The performance is a dance performance in a very large white room in the Museum of Fine Arts in Antwerp. It was done during 2020, and of course, because of the pandemic, it was just it was filmed. It's 20 minutes, and then after that brainstorm session, Nina wrote the audio description for that 20 minutes film. I will read a part of the audio description just to illustrate how different it is from traditional audio description. There's also an audio introduction, but just for now, the AD, which is the most interesting part. It's in different voices, and it starts with a male voice. Light. An open space envelopes me. Only music fills the void. Where am I? A cable on the ground presses into the sole of my foot. Step by step, I balance on the black line. I wait, my left arm moving slightly sideways, searching for hold. My fingertips caress the sounds that embrace me. Until a kink in the cable makes my feet stop. I stand still, feel, listen. The cable guides me deeper into the light. Suddenly, a warm girl's hand rests on my instep of my foot and slides down my pant leg to my palm. The fingers of the hand explore and just barely touch. And then a girl's voice. I place your hand on my head and stand in front of you. My eyes follow our movements. Here you can feel my head. Here your hand rests on my heart. And then it goes on like that. So in 2 days, next Friday, we will meet with the creator, Iris Bush, with the blind dancer, and Joyce, the visually impaired woman who helped us to create the AD, and then Nina and I. And we will talk about how to create the new performance based on that audio description. So we're very curious where this will go, and it's a completely innovative process as well to both create the AD with an expert user and then to take it from a starting point. So it's kind of the other way round. The teaching in with this third project is that it introduces students into collaborative processes, and it also teaches them how to work in team with expert users. And that also is very always interesting for them. So maybe I can just jump to the concluding thoughts, and then we can go see if there are some questions also about this Isomo. Through all these projects, we realized that new different working processes were born, and that we are ready to discover furthermore. We just must keep our minds and eyes open to new trends and continue to collaborate, as has been said today several times. But we also have to collaborate with other disciplines, with art and film programs, for instance, with disability studies and so on. So interdisciplinary research and practice can be very enriching for us all. And then this will also move to change the way we have to train our describers, how to train our students in the end. So that was it for the presentation. I wonder whether there are some questions. Dragos?
I do have one now. Thank you both, Sabine and Nina. Super interesting presentation. I was wondering, because you work with expert users, whether this collaboration you feel or you notice sometimes that the expert is introducing a bit of jargon or is adding complexity to the content itself, or has that never happened?
Not complexity. They are. I don't. They're always very helpful, and it's just different. I don't see any. Nina, I don't know if you see some.
Yeah, the
complexities here.
Yeah, the complexity is more in the different perspectives that each professional and experiential profile puts different accents. The choreographer wants to add more terminology. The writer wants to add a more narrative approach. Users emphasize not to interpret too much. Musicians focus on the music and not describing too much. And then in the end, you have to find a compromise. So that's definitely, I think, the challenge or the complexity in these collaborative approaches, that in the end, there is somebody who needs to decide what the compromise will be. But it is very interesting.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, whether, someone who's a dancer and has that particular language, speaks the language, and then we go, and now I am doing this, and then, we don't know what that is, but they do.
Yeah, so that's definitely, there's different perspectives, and then see how you integrate them. And that will definitely be the discussion on next Friday, where we're also thinking how to integrate this into a new performance, which in itself should be accessible from the start, integrated. So there might be, their ideas are that there will be just description first or only, or voices only, or dances describing things as they dance. but yeah, many new experimental things. Where I'm very curious to see what users might think of it.
I was thinking of one more example, Nina. When we went to see Marie-Jo Lafontaine, the second artwork that will be made into a tactile creative object by the blind artist. We met her, we talked about the audio description, we let her listen to the audio description, the artist herself, so I mean, it's a video installation, and she commented on the audio description that it didn't give the good accents on the sensuality of her video performance. So she made us notice some things she wanted to introduce in her video installation, which she herself didn't recognize enough in the audio description. But then, of course, well, we talked about this, and like Nina said, it's about looking for a compromise between all the visions.
Thank you.
Thank you again very, very much.